Welcome back to PsychScreen Perspectives channel. Today we're diving deep into the psychological themes of the movie Without Remorse, starring the actor Michael B. Jordan. This film delves into loss, revenge, trauma, and the complexities of military operations. We will explore the stages of grief, the psychological toll of war, and how trauma reshapes individuals' minds and actions. For those who haven't seen the movie yet, Without Remorse follows the story of John Clark, a former Navy SEAL portrayed by the actor Michael B. Jordan. After his wife Pam, played by the actress Lauren London, is tragically murdered while pregnant with their child, John embarks on a quest for revenge. Along the way, he uncovers a larger conspiracy involving military corruption and government operations that put both soldiers and civilians at risk. Let's begin by examining how John Clark's psychological journey is shaped by the loss of his wife Pam. In many ways, this loss represents a critical moment in John's life, and it provides a vivid example of the stages of grief described by Elizabeth Ross: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Denial. Initially, John's in shock. The violent murder of his wife in her sleep while pregnant with their child is a blow that defies belief. He doesn't immediately process what has happened and is fixated on the notion that this can't be real. Anger. As the gravity of the situation sinks in, John's rage intensifies. He begins to feel an overwhelming desire for justice, but more importantly, revenge. This is the pivotal moment where his personal sense of morality and justice begins to become clouded by his need for vengeance. His anger fuels the decision he makes throughout the film, including going against military orders and placing himself in dangerous situations. Bargaining. In some ways, John's quest for revenge can be seen as a form of bargaining. He believes that if he exacts revenge, he will somehow be able to make peace with the loss of Pam. It's not a typical bargaining with a higher power, but rather a psychological coping mechanism where he hopes that the pain will be alleviated if he achieves the outcome he desires. The stage of depression. As the events unfold, John's grief becomes more complex. He's not only grieving Pam's death, but also the loss of his future with her. His emotional numbness, withdrawal, and internalized pain are all signs of this stage. John is plagued with survival's guilt and the overwhelming sense that he is responsible for not protecting her. The stage of acceptance. By the end of the film, John begins to come to terms with his loss, but it's through a complex lens. He doesn't achieve the purest form of acceptance, as the film ends with him taking justice into his own hands rather than finding peace through conventional means. However, he does start to realize that his obsession with revenge is taking a toll on his humanity and his emotional well-being. Now, let's take a deeper look at the psychological toll of John's military background and how the film explores the trauma soldiers experience. John Clark is a Navy SEAL, and his training and previous operations have prepared him for the chaos and brutality of war. However, the psychological effects of war are long-lasting. One of the long-lasting war psychological effects is post-traumatic stress disorder. John's actions throughout the film suggest that he has been impacted by PTSD. The trauma from his military experiences and the violent murder of his wife caused him to exhibit symptoms such as hypervigilance, rage, and emotional numbness. His impulsive actions, like disregarding the military change of command and acting recklessly, reflect the emotional instability that comes from unresolved trauma. The concept of moral injury is crucial here. John is deeply torn between his military duties and his personal quest for revenge. The betrayal of the military structure and the government, which are supposed to protect citizens, leaves him questioning his own values and sense of duty. This moral conflict often leads to a crisis of identity and purpose, which is evident in John's struggle to reconcile his role as a soldier with the loss of his loved one. Throughout the film, John uses revenge as a coping mechanism to deal with his grief and trauma. However, this vengeance-driven approach only perpetuates the cycle of violence and trauma, as he becomes consumed by the need to avenge Pam's death. His drive for retribution ultimately isolates him from others, including those who are still in the military, as they view him as a liability or a rogue agent. One of the larger psychological themes in the movie Without Remorse is the role that military institutions and government agencies play in perpetuating cycles of violence. The film explores how these systems exploit soldiers, using them as tools in larger political and military agendas. Manipulation and betrayal. The government's involvement in covert operations that place soldiers in morally ambiguous situations highlights the psychological cost of military service. John's journey reveals how soldiers can be manipulated into carrying out actions that they may not fully understand or agree with. The betrayal by the government and military leadership leaves John feeling like a pawn in a much larger game. This betrayal fuels his anger and sense of disillusionment, contributing to his growing distrust of authority. The psychological impact of war. The film also shows how the consequences of war can extend beyond the battlefield. Soldiers often return home to find themselves disconnected from their families, friends, and civilian life. John's inability to reintegrate into society and his continued focus on revenge highlights the difficulties many veterans face when transitioning from combat to civilian life. This disconnect can lead to further mental health issues including isolation, depression, and difficulty in forming meaningful relationships. John's relationship with his supervisors, particularly with Lieutenant Colonel Relly, played by Jodie Turner-Smith, also highlights the psychological dynamics of authority and leadership. John's willingness to defy authority in favor of his personal agenda suggests that his perception of leadership is profoundly affected by the events he experienced. The betrayal by Relly, someone who was once in a position of trust, speaks to the complex dynamics of authority within the military. John's belief in a just cause is shattered when he realizes that even those in positions of power are driven by their own hidden agendas. This disillusionment with authority is a common psychological response in the wake of trauma, as it can lead to feelings of helplessness and distrust. John's willingness to take matters into his own hands rather than follow orders also speaks to the breakdown of social order that often accompanies trauma. When individuals feel that the institutions meant to protect them are corrupt or ineffective, it can lead to feelings of disempowerment, which often results in a desire to take control of their circumstances, even if it means acting outside the law. John becomes increasingly fixated on his mission. His single-minded pursuit of vengeance demonstrates a psychological phenomenon of tunnel vision. This often happens in trauma survivors who are fixated on a goal or an event, blocking out everything else in their lives. John's obsession with avenging his wife becomes all-consuming, and he begins to sacrifice his own well-being in the process. As John continues his quest, his mental health deteriorates further. His inability to let go of his anger and grief only deepens his emotional isolation. The relentless drive for vengeance erodes his sense of self, leaving him in a shell of the person he once was. This emotional depletion is a powerful reminder of the causes of living in a cycle of unresolved grief and trauma. In conclusion, Without Remorse highlights the psychological consequences of trauma, loss, and revenge. John Clark's journey is a vivid example of how unresolved grief and trauma can shape a person's psyche, leading them down a dangerous path where they become consumed by anger and a desire for vengeance. However, the film also illustrates the importance of confronting and processing grief in healthier ways rather than allowing it to fester and control one's action. The film offers an opportunity to reflect on how trauma, grief, and revenge can affect not only individuals, but also society at large. It reminds us of the importance of mental health, coping strategies, and the need for support systems, especially for those who serve in the military. Without Remorse is more than just a revenge thriller. It's a psychological exploration of the human mind and the impact of external forces on personal trauma. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to PsychScreen Perspectives, and see you in the next video.